Hi, and welcome. So today we are going to talk about labels. Have you ever been labeled? There are two types of labels. There is your label of your core identity, and there's a label of your operational identity. And the trick is that sometimes we label ourselves and those things become associated with those identities. So let me explain what I mean. So when I was a teenager, I was labeled by my parents and my family as rebellious, defiant, bad, the black sheep. And so I really believed those labels to my core. And I behaved in a way that aligned with those labels. I started sneaking out, I was lying, I was skipping school, all things that in my mind those labels equated to. So let me give you an example from when I was an adult. So as an adult, I was a teacher and I left my teaching career and I had labeled myself a teacher. I believed from the core of my being that I was a teacher. I thought I was going to teach until I was in my 90s and they were going to say, "Get out, lady, before you die in front of the kids or before you break a hip or something. You're old, you're wrinkly, get out." And my teaching career only lasted 6 years. And that was devastating to me because I had labeled myself a teacher. I thought that's who I was at my core. So the label of rebellious, defiant, black sheep, that was more of an operational identity because that really wasn't who I was at my core. Prior to being in the relationship with the boyfriend that started the labeling of those things, I had never really gotten in trouble. I was such a rule follower and listened to my teachers at school, never had a detention, none of those things that would indicate I was rebellious, defiant, or bad. So here's where the situation got really interesting. So when I left my teaching career, I was really, really struggling to figure out who I was outside of a teacher. I was adjusting to being a stay-at-home mom. I didn't resonate with that label of being a stay-at-home mom because I never thought I would be. I always thought that I would work and my kids would be in daycare and then they would be home with me on the summer, but then when school started back to daycare, they would go. So I really did not see myself in any way, shape, or form as a stay-at-home mom. I saw myself as a teacher. So I was really, really struggling to shift out of the label of teacher and into the label of stay-at-home mom. So I decided to see a therapist, thinking that I was having an identity crisis and the therapist was going to say, "Great, that's right. Absolutely, you're having an identity crisis. And here are 3 ways to fix it." And that was really not how the journey went at all. I'll share more of that journey with you in later videos. But the biggest takeaway was that in that time of being with the therapist, she said, "Oh, do you realize that you're codependent?" I had never heard the word codependent or codependency before, so I didn't really know what those meant. So I got home from my therapy session and took to Google. And yes, I could check all the boxes for being codependent or running a pattern of codependency. And then in a few sessions later, she said, "Do you realize that you're an anxious person?" And I had never considered myself an anxious person. So then I got home and took to Google again. And yes, I could check the box for being an anxious person. Then a few sessions later, she said, "Do you realize that you suffer from childhood emotional neglect?" Again, never heard of that term, that phrase. So back to Google I went and Googled childhood emotional neglect. So while those labels were really helpful in getting me to the root cause of the problem, it wasn't helpful to just give the label and then focus on that label. So once I was labeled codependent, I went to the library and I checked out all the books I could find on codependency and I read them and read them and read them and took notes. I had a binder of notes on codependency and then did the same thing with anxiety and then did the same thing with childhood emotional neglect. And with that came books on childhood emotional neglect, came books on shame and doing inner child work and all of the things associated with that. So I became so fixated on those 3 labels: codependency, anxiety, and childhood emotional neglect. And the more I said those labels, the more I said, "I am codependency, I am anxious, I am suffering from childhood emotional neglect," the more they attach to my identity. So we have our core identity and we have our operational identity. And the labels from teenage years, those are more habitual. That wasn't really who I was at my core. That really wasn't who I ever was going to be. I was not rebellious. I was not defiant. I was not a black sheep. Still to this day, I'm such a rule follower. And so that was just a habit in that moment and that period of life. But that wasn't who I am at my core. So, who you are at your core is your most authentic, true version of yourself. That's basically who you are when you're born. That is who you are innately. That's before you have all of the experiences from other people projected onto you. Your operational identity, however, is who you become after those projections. It's who you become based on life experiences. It's the thoughts, the ideas, the perceptions that you take on because of your parents' beliefs, because of the way you're treated in school, the way you're treated in the community. So those are operational identities. So operationally, yes, rebellious, defiant, black sheep, yep. And the reason we have these identities is because when we're in our operational identity, that's our survival mode identity. And in that moment, I was trying to hold on to this boyfriend that I so desperately wanted to keep, but my parents were not a fan of and did not want me to have any parts of him. So yes, I was completely acting out because I was trying to figure out the situation for myself. And also I was 16 at the time. And so I was a little hot-headed then. But teaching, that is who I am at my core. I teach in many facets. So I'm a Girl Scout leader. I teach girls there. I'm the founder of an after school program. I teach girls there. I'm a life coach. So I teach my clients. I'm a mother and I teach my kids. And so teaching really that's who I am at my core. That's who I am innately. And I know that because my parents would say that when I was little, before I'd even gone to school, I would play school. And my dad would always think, how does she even know what to do? She's never been to school, because I was taken care of by my granny until I was 4 years old. And so being a teacher, yes, that's who I am at my core. That's innate. And that's probably why the struggle was so real when I left my teaching career, because my core identity was disappearing, or so I thought it was anyway. So the reason that labels are important is because not to define ourselves and create that identity for ourselves, that core identity, but more so you can look for the pattern that results from the label. So was I codependent? Yes. Was that operational? Yes. That was all learned behavior. Same with the anxiety, same with the things that resulted from the childhood emotional neglect. They were all learned. It wasn't who I was at my core. I wasn't born codependent. I wasn't born anxious. I wasn't born suffering from childhood emotional neglect. Those were not innate things. That was operational. But here's the thing, the more I said it, the more I said, yes, I am codependent. I am anxious. I am someone who's been affected by childhood emotional neglect. They were starting to become a part of my identity because I couldn't see myself past them. And once they become part of your core identity, it's really hard to break those patterns that associate with those labels. So it's really important to not say, I am codependent. Instead, it's important to say, in the past, I ran a pattern of codependency, or I am currently working to end the pattern of codependency or minimize the pattern of codependency. Same thing with anxiety or childhood emotional neglect. And so when I work with a client, I really encourage them not to label themselves. Please don't label yourself a failure. That was another label that I took to almost to my core, because I was so focused on things that didn't work and the experiences that I was having and where I was with my operational identity. So instead, don't label yourself with those things, because once they become part of who you are, it's really hard to shift those labels from your identity, because they become you. Instead, look to see what is being created from the label. Look at the pattern that's resulting from the label. So when I could take a step back and say, ooh, I am not codependency, I run a pattern of codependency, then it allowed me to see that I was running a pattern of people pleasing. I was running a pattern of self-sabotage. I was running a pattern of not making myself a priority and putting other people's needs first. I was running a pattern of saying yes when I really wanted to say no. And so that was more powerful than the actual label itself, because once I could recognize the patterns that were resulting from the labels, then I could work to create more empowering patterns, and I could stop those unserving patterns. And so I question you today and I ask, what label are you giving yourself? And is it who you are at your core? Or is it a habitual identity pattern that's resulting from your operational identity? And so, if it's something that is operational, it's not who you are at your core, stop calling yourself that label and just look to see what's resulting from the label. And that is going to be a huge game changer. So thanks so much for tuning in. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button below.